Slow Burn Media, an evergreen podcast, presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless. Previously on the Colonial Parkway Murders, Part 2.
30 years, and nothing but frustration for families of 8 people who fell victim to an apparent serial killer along the Colonial Parkway. Keith's car was found, but the two have never been seen again.
The body's never found.
He's not going to come here. Somebody else most likely brought the car here.
For the families of the people whose lives were lost some 30 years ago, the frustration is just as strong now as it was then.
And tonight, we are looking at missteps made during the opening stages of the investigation that may still be hindering things now.
All of the unsolved murders, there is no closure for any of the families, but especially for the families of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley.
3 days later, on Sunday evening, that car, a Honda Civic, was found off the Colonial Parkway. It had been rolled into these bushes, almost into the water.
Rebecca Andowski and Cathy Thomas, 2 haunting names never forgotten by people in Hampton Roads.
They're the first 2 victims of the Colonial Parkway murders.
Me and one of the other detectives found David about 50 feet down, I guess.
I won't ever stop. This is very important to me and to my family. Typically what the FBI will do is the investigative agent will text me and say, can you please call me? And I'll know they have some news. And we're talking a lot these days, and I'm thrilled about that.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Colonial Parkway Murders, Part 3. I am your host, Bill Huffman, and this week's guest is the one and only Bill Thomas, the brother of one of the first victims in the Colonial Parkway serial killings, Cathy Thomas. Now, Bill has had a very big impact on the case and continues to be a leader in the fight for justice. And on this week's episode, we're going to discuss what is going on in the familial database world. As you may have realized, things have sort of slowed to a trickle as far as cold cases being solved. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that one weekend, GEDmatch, which was the database that a lot of these law enforcement companies or agencies were using, decided to change some of their policies, and they made it an opt-in program. So if you get a chance to listen deeply into what Bill has to say, I believe this week's episode is a call for action. And if you want people to be able to track down their loved ones, whether they're lost or have been killed or, worse, this is a situation that is fluid, and Bill has a very good perspective on it. So I am going to let Bill have this platform again, and we're going to discuss what is going on with the opt-in option on these databases. So please join me this week. And again, thank you for joining me this week. So in regards to what's going on with the DNA technology today, a lot of the solved cases, they were using database called GEDmatch. You had mentioned, in our previous conversation that you had come across some information and some things that you didn't think were on the up and up, or you questioned. And I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on what's going on currently with the state of DNA and the opt-in aspect of GEDmatch.
Yeah. First of all, just to remind your listeners, in the Colonial Parkway murders, the families have been told that we have potential perpetrator DNA in 3 of the 4 crime scenes. So that doesn't mean it is perpetrator DNA, and they've never told us that the DNA in these 3 of the 4 crime scenes, they've never said that it matches either. So we're not saying it's the same person or persons. But the families see the potential for forensic genealogy, or some people are calling it genetic genealogy. I actually prefer forensic personally. That is, using these DNA databases like GEDmatch, uploading samples from unknown individuals, and then trying to determine who these people are using typically the GEDmatch database. And what I was touching on with you before, Bill, was GEDmatch, very unfortunately, has made a decision to reverse its policy over the past year, and they are now requiring their 1.2 million GEDmatch members to opt into law enforcement. This is a complete reversal of their position over the past year, which has resulted in all of those cases being solved. 50 plus people have been identified as potential perpetrators, including Joseph D'Angelo in the Golden State Killer case. So obviously there is a tremendous amount of potential for legitimate law enforcement agencies to work with DNA labs, often but not always Parabon. And now Bodie Labs and others are also getting into the business of assisting law enforcement with these genealogical searches. And we just see tremendous potential here. And the very unfortunate decision and short-sighted decision, in our opinion, on GEDmatch's part to suddenly reverse themselves after a year of success and 50 plus cases having potential suspects identified. This is a major setback for our families, and I think for the 200,000 cold case murders across the United States.
So in regards to the opt-in, did they automatically change the policy for everybody that had already uploaded their DNA, and then they made it an opt-in option?
They did. And so what happened was there was a case in Utah, and we don't have to get into all of the details, but a law enforcement agency, I think, pushed the envelope. The policy had been for the previous year that if GEDmatch could be used by law enforcement if they were searching for a potential perpetrator in a rape or sexual assault. So it was a pretty high bar. And a law enforcement agency in Utah pushed GEDmatch beyond its normal standard and beyond the description that was in GEDmatch's terms of service by asking them to allow law enforcement and a DNA lab to upload a sample in a situation where there was a very serious assault on an elderly lady playing church music in her place of worship, no less. And this woman had been very seriously assaulted, but she was not raped and she was not murdered, thankfully. But when BuzzFeed News got a hold of this story, it was a minor kerfuffle, as my mom would say, on the part of some longtime genealogists who kicked up a fuss because they felt that GEDmatch had violated its own terms of service. And that small but very vocal group of genealogists, some of whom I've had some interaction with in the last couple of months, they pressured GEDmatch. And so the original position, as I mentioned, over the previous year, since the Golden State Killer case had broken, was that all of the about million, now it's about 1.2 million profiles in GEDmatch were potentially searchable anonymously. In other words, no one's individual information was available to law enforcement, but gave them a place to upload this perpetrator DNA and then search for potential matches. And what they did is over a weekend, with literally zero notice to their million plus user base, they switched from all DNA profiles are searchable to you're only searchable if you opt in to law enforcement searching. Now, interestingly, about 100,000 people so far, from what the latest articles I've read on the GEDmatch database, have made the decision to opt in. But remember, a lot of people, if they're involved in genealogy, they may have died, They may have retired. They may have lost interest, but they left their profile up on 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and then who do not currently allow searching by law enforcement without a subpoena, or uploaded to GEDmatch, which until the end of May did allow searching. So I have to contrast that with another database, which is pretty comparable and is being used by law enforcement, called Family Tree DNA. Family Tree DNA, which has a little over 1 million profiles, is also working with law enforcement. Now, interestingly, they went the opposite route. They tell their user base, if you do not want your DNA searched by law enforcement anonymously, you can opt out. So it's a completely different approach. And interestingly, less than 2% of the 1 million plus people in Family Tree DNA have chosen to opt out of law enforcement searching. Whereas, and I think GEDmatch, who are well-meaning people, it's a not-for-profit organization run by two gentlemen, one out of Texas, one out of Florida. And I've had some contact with Curtis Rogers, who runs GEDmatch. I think his intentions were good, but I think he collapsed under pressure from these very vocal genealogists who were insisting that this was a complete violation of everyone's civil rights. I think the whole thing is absurd. It's a little bit like saying that fingerprint searches are unconstitutional somehow as well. These people sound like such Luddites when they make this argument that this is somehow outrageous that law enforcement would have this capability.
Well, and when you boil it down, it's just another tool for law enforcement to protect citizens that aren't committing crime. So I don't understand why, like you had mentioned, with GEDmatch kind of caving to the pressure. I mean, I was going to ask, but you kind of answered it for me. If you thought it was just a rash sort of decision, just sort of to get everybody off his back because of the fact that, it was just sort of like, okay, that's it.
Well, the whole thing is ridiculous, and I think it was incredibly unprofessional. My understanding is that a long-time genealogist, who shall remain nameless, had been advising GEDmatch for some time on a pro bono basis. This guy's also an attorney, and he had advised GEDmatch on different issues. This is, as I said, this is a very small not-for-profit run by two gentlemen who got into this because of their interest in genealogy. It's all very well intended, but then a group of hysterical, quite frankly, genealogists suddenly, they hear about the story from Utah via BuzzFeed, and they start, insisting that this is outrageous and this is inappropriate. And I've actually had some exchanges, and I've kept it polite and respectful. I've had some exchanges with some of these folks on the genealogy websites, and they refer to these these genealogy databases as our and their databases, when they really belong to the people who uploaded their individual data, myself included, and my family. And I have to be frank, Bill, they were incredibly uncaring, arrogant, and high-handed in their responses to me and other family members when we raised the issue that we believe that a genealogy database could be incredibly useful to helping solve America's 200,000 cold case murders. Clearly it was working. We were actually moving along at a clip where these DNA labs, mostly Parabon, but as I mentioned, others were getting into the business. They were announcing about a case a week where law enforcement had taken the information of a potential perpetrator, and then they go out and do all the traditional law enforcement work that they normally would. They are looking at this person's background. Ultimately, they actually go out and after checking, it's typically him out, they are then surreptitiously collecting his DNA typically from a discarded item like a coffee cup, that sort of thing, and then retesting the DNA to see if they have a match from the original perpetrator DNA. This was working incredibly well. And we found it so disappointing that this small group of very vocal genealogists were able to make determinations for literally 1 million people on the GEDmatch database. And at the same time, we cannot help but note that 1 million people on a similar database, Family Tree DNA, only less than 2% have actually chosen to opt out. One of the points I tried to make a few months ago, back in May when all of this happened, was why didn't we give everyone, say, 6 months notice? In other words, if GEDmatch was going to make this decision to go to an opt-in system, why didn't they give everyone 6 months notice? Instead, they did this over a weekend, almost like in a panic. And I believe that some of these genealogists who were insisting that this was a terrible problem and needed to be immediately addressed, which was ludicrous, insisted that GEDmatch make an immediate U-turn and basically shut off their database to law enforcement. As I mentioned, about 100,000 people have opted in, but that's a very small database if you're going to be looking for potential matches amongst, hundreds of millions of people here in the U.S.
So as far as GEDmatch goes and the opt-in policy, do you believe that they can reverse course and maybe right the ship that they've sort of wronged and kind of do what you just said and maybe kind of come at it a different way? Or do you think have you talked to them about that aspect of things?
I have not. I've talked to Mr. Rogers, Curtis Rogers, in the past. Very, very nice man. And I have not talked to him because at the time of this whole big fuss, he was just getting, harassed by people. And I didn't want to be part of that chorus of people, sort of yelling at this, really nice retired guy in Florida who set this thing up and probably has never made a dime on his small not-for-profit. I don't think at this point that GEDmatch would reverse course. I think it would be the fair and right and reasonable thing to do, but the whole thing ended up being incredibly disappointing. Interestingly, the genealogical community split, and there were some bitter arguments. I tried not to be one of the people, driving that, those hard feelings. I don't necessarily see GEDmatch as reversing course. They really should, but I don't know that they. I don't know that they will. I guess I couldn't rule out reaching out to Curtis Rogers again and maybe having a conversation with him. He's in Florida, I'm in Connecticut, but I'd certainly be happy to talk with him by phone or what have you. But unfortunately, some of the people that have been giving him really bad and to be frank, very self-interested advice. In other words, this group of genealogists, they want to keep this sort of a closed community. And they might criticize me because I have an agenda as well. Although, as we've talked about, my agenda is always the same. I'm trying to move forward the Colonial Parkway Murders and my sister Cathy's murder as part of that series. And I'm pretty upfront with everybody in terms of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, you obviously have a personal, attachment to the GEDmatch situation. And do you believe that it's a moral or ethical dilemma that they're kind of facing, that is it the ACLU, is it a privacy concern so much as it is of, we just don't want to deal with because we didn't start this, they didn't start the program to catch criminals. That just sort of evolved into that sort of aspect of things. And do you think that sort of caught them off guard to the point where they didn't know what the best avenue to go was, other than to, without shutting the whole thing down, the quick and easy solution was to make it a opt-in type of program? Because it's free, right?
It is free. You can pay GEDmatch a small upcharge for additional services and access, but GEDmatch is free. And typically the way individuals like myself would put up a profile to GEDmatch is they would start with one of the paid services like Family Tree DNA or Ancestry or 23andMe, and then you have an option, which we're actually urging people to now take those steps, and they can upload their profile from those paid sites because you own it, you paid for it, and you can then upload it to GEDmatch. And I'll ask you to include a link for people that with a YouTube video. It explains it. It's pretty simple. I do get the privacy concerns. I really do. And I do understand where my friends at the ACLU, and I'm actually a member of the ACLU for what it's worth. I understand their concerns about privacy. Yet at the same time, I think all of us have to admit that privacy, that ship might have sailed. In other words, the first time we all decided to sign up for that first email account, and you just keep adding more and more elements, do we really think that we're that hard to find? And it's funny, people are debating these things so passionately on social media. And I've worked pretty closely with the FBI on my sister's case. If you don't think that the FBI or local law enforcement or whomever can't find you in a matter of minutes, it's a little harder when your name is Bill Huffman or Bill Thomas. Those are a little bit, kind of common names. At least we're not, William Smith, but they can typically find you in a matter of minutes. And to the point about the database was originally set up as genealogical database, I get it. Well, fingerprints were originally set up to catch criminals. And so, but now what do? We've added features where many parents, myself included, have chosen to have their kids fingerprinted. And you're waving your hand. Back
in 1984, I remember going to the local library and getting fingerprinted.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, they fingerprinted you as a boy, as a kid, for safety purposes. Now, remember, this was originally set up to catch, the John Dillingers of the world. I'm dating myself here in our history of crime, but it was set up to catch bad guys. But they realized that the technology could also help keep kids safe. So it's kind of similar in that sometimes something is developed with one purpose in mind, and you realize that it has other potential good and worthwhile uses. I actually think that from a legal standpoint, I'm not an attorney, but I've certainly worked with some great ones. I don't think that using the genealogical database like Family Tree DNA or GEDmatch or what have you, I don't think it violates any constitutional provision about unlawful searches and seizures. In the same way that I don't think using a database of fingerprints violates anyone's civil rights. And look, we've got to be grown up about this. And this is what I think is lacking in this debate so far. If you and I are driving down the street, I might not love it But there are cameras now that are set up on major and minor highways around the country that are photographing passersby. And now law enforcement uses those databases to see if Bill Thomas, I'm wearing my criminal hat now, was at a certain place at a certain time, driving my Mini Cooper with my license plate on it. And I don't love it, but I think there's a certain degree of surveillance going on in general of our movements, which is typically only applied when law enforcement is investigating a crime. Now, my friends on the civil libertarian side, they might get freaked out about it. But like I said a minute ago, Bill, that ship sailed decades ago. We're all on the World Wide Web. You and I are using the technology right now to have this conversation and communicate with a whole bunch of other people. And all of us have made ourselves easy to find. And if you look at what people talk about on social media, particularly Facebook, day in, day out, the concept of privacy is growing antiquated. I'm not saying I'm 100% comfortable with that, but I would make a moral argument rather than a legal argument. I don't think that the opponents of searching genealogical databases for potential bad guys are going to prevail in a legal argument. And I think from a societal good argument, I think that I'm willing to give up a little snippet of my privacy if that allows law enforcement and a DNA lab, certified DNA lab, to look at 1 million plus people. Some of the larger databases like Ancestry and 23andMe have, more than 10 million. Allows them to search those databases anonymously to look for potential matches, which would help identify serial rapists, serial murderers. I don't think most people have a problem with that. Witness the 98% of people on Family Tree DNA that did not opt out of law enforcement searching. I think we all need to be honest and grown up about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's, there's a great documentary on Netflix called Terms and Conditions, I believe that's the title. But it's all about basically, you click that little box that says I agree, and boom, your privacy's already been, I guess the proper word is infiltrated, since we are using Google or the internet or anything like that. We carry our phones with us everywhere we go. So if you want to track our movements, it's so, like you mentioned, if law enforcement wants to get you, they can. I mean, I live in a city where the police have those scanners on their vehicles that scan basically constantly of any license plate that's driving by, that even when they're driving in the neighborhood, and if it picks up something that's got a warrant or it goes off, and boom, they can pull you over. I mean, there's some kind of, I don't know how on the up and up that is, but it's not designed to hurt people. It's designed to, catch people who have been either, implicated in a crime or have committed a crime or have a warrant out for their arrest. So,
sure. And I don't think most people regard having a license plate on your car as being, somehow a violation of your civil rights. That's part of the deal when you decide you're going to have a vehicle. You register that vehicle, in your case with the state of Ohio, me with the state of Connecticut, and you register the car, and you've got an identifier on it. And at the same time, when you and I met a couple of months ago at CrimeCon, we said hello and had a good conversation, and then we talked about, hey, maybe we should have an online conversation about the Colonial Parkway murders and other issues. And I think we were both real excited about it. The first thing I did when I got home after I unpacked and ran some laundry was, in looking at all the people I wanted to follow up with, you included, I looked you up on the internet. And, I started, reading and listening to some podcasts. You're smiling as you say this, but you've made a decision as an individual that you want to use social media. And part of the same deal, just like the car thing, is if you put yourself out on social media, unless you're going to use a fake name and a picture with a mustache on it, you're probably going to appear on social media in ways where people are very quickly going to figure out, who's this guy, Bill Huffman? Oh, well, he's a newsman, he's a producer, and he's got a successful series of podcasts. And, look, to be frank, I never looked up your address, but, that capability exists. You can go to whitepages.com and put in a person's name and a city and a state, and quite often you can find someone's home address, et cetera, et cetera. And don't forget, folks, every time you're involved in a real estate transaction, all that stuff is recorded, and it goes on and on and on. We are not anonymous. We've never been anonymous, and we get less anonymous every single day. So let's stop with the histrionics on the genealogical database. Law enforcement is using it for a legitimate purpose. They're searching it anonymously. Only when they get a hit do they then begin the hard work, working with genealogists, to narrow down who this individual might be. And then once they figure out, well, this could be a person from such and such a family, as I mentioned, then they go back and do all the traditional confirmation that a law enforcement investigator would do, which is determining who this individual is. Does he or she, it's typically he in these examples, have a connection to this place and time? And then ultimately, they go out and they determine with a fair degree of certainty, this is the right person. And ultimately, they're looking to collect that individual's DNA to see if it matches the original perpetrator DNA that they loaded into the database. The objections, I understand people's concerns, but I don't think that their concern about privacy is going to supersede society's right to go back and stop criminals, serial rapists, serial murderers, etc., from literally getting away with murder.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Bill. And this would actually be a great opportunity to take a second to hear from our sponsor this week, BetterHelp.com. Having dealt with anxiety and depression for most of my life, I know a thing or two about the importance of mental health. So today I'm pleased to tell you about a great company. Is there something that interferes with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp Online Counseling is there for you. Connect with your professional counselor in a safe and private online environment. It's so convenient, you can get help on your own time and at your own pace. And now you can schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist. With over 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists across all 50 states, BetterHelp is there for you. If you're not happy with any of your counselors for any reason at any time, you can get a new one for no additional charge. They even have apps for your computer or smartphone. Whether you're suffering from depression, anger, stress, anxiety, LGBT matters, or self-esteem issues, they have a licensed professional counselor for you. And everything you share is confidential. Best of all, it's a truly affordable option. Who Killed Amy Mahalovic listeners get 10% off your first month with discount code WHO. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/WHO. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's betterhelp.com/WHO. Yeah, I definitely think that, as a public, we've given up that right to privacy, and I think if knowing that and being aware of it is important, especially when you do sign up for things like Ancestry or you put your stuff out on GEDmatch. I mean, it's going to be, well, first of all, people have to realize nobody's that important. They're not going to be looking up your call logs if you're just some guy or some girl. If you've committed a crime or people think you may have committed a crime, then they can start the process of, investigating whom that person is. But for anybody to think that they're important enough that anybody's just sitting around listening to their phone calls or their text messages just to see what they're up to, I mean, that's just a little egotistical, if you ask me.
It is. Look, I've butted heads with the FBI on my sister's case any number of times. And, even I'm not arrogant enough to think that law enforcement has the time to listen to my boring conversations about with my partner Pamela about, the contractors coming over tomorrow to work on the roof. I mean, literally, look, we've all got to understand that this has a tremendous benefit to us as a society. And by the way, I shouldn't let this go by without mentioning, keep in mind that databases like this and searches for suspects are also helping to free innocent people who have been wrongly incarcerated, convicted, and based on earlier technology. And so folks like the Innocence Project are working to get people who were tried and convicted but wrongfully out of jail. And we obviously can't give back those people their the years of their lives that they spent behind bars for crimes they didn't commit. But at least we can figure out who the correct perpetrators are, or if we got it wrong, and we have to be honest and grown up about this. There are people sitting in jail right now for crimes that they didn't commit. And so using technology like DNA, which is, to me, is just like a fingerprint. If we can help get innocent people out of jail and try to at least right those wrongs, there's another benefit. So there's so much potential here, and the idea that we have to fight this every step of the way because this is going to interfere with our ability to make a living as genealogists, which is, again, I'm going to be frank here, that's a bit more of what's going on. A certain group of genealogists want to keep this sort of very private, and it's their little special fiefdom. And they're the people that you have to pay to help you access this. And obviously, the millions of us that have signed up for Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, and then nonprofit databases like GEDmatch are finding out that, we can actually figure a fair amount of this stuff out ourselves. We don't necessarily need to pay somebody to help us research our family tree.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think that everything that you've brought up as far as the ethics, the morality, the beneficiary, the benefits of the actual program itself outweigh anything that could be negative. And I hope that they understand that they can be a part of this in a positive way and not be or feel like they're doing something immoral or unethical, because again, people, like you mentioned before, 2% of the other database are the ones that opted out of the ability for the police to investigate, because people understand that crimes happen and DNA is left, and sometimes that's all we're left with is just that. We don't have an image, we don't have a sketch, we don't have anything. We just have some fluids or whatever, hair. And if you don't have companies like GEDmatch or these other database companies working with law enforcement, I just think it's a disservice to the technology that we've built to this point in time. I mean, it's 2019. I think it's time to be okay with the fact that we can use these high-end databases to help, like you mentioned, get innocent people out of jail. but then in the same sense, take that innocent person out of jail and put the guilty person in jail. So
Exactly.
to me, it just doesn't make any sense why they wouldn't want to be a part of that. But I also understand that it's a sticky situation, and then they had a lot of pressure on them, and they may have just overreacted, but the ship is over. I mean, it's not like it couldn't change, I mean,
well, I certainly hope so. And I think you're absolutely right. I also think they got bad advice from self-interested people. And it's funny, this might be a little bit of a subtle point, but I think I can convey it. Those databases were set up by people interested in finding loved ones, et cetera, finding family members. And there's a lot of people searching for lost loved ones. So, in other words, there's a lot of people that are adopted. They're from they're products of divorce or adoption, broken families. I don't mean to make it all sound negative, but there are people out there looking for their families. And all of us understand that this is a very powerful thing. I think many of us want to feel that sense of belonging. So this database was set up to do good for a group of people searching for family. And I think that's very positive. We used Ancestry ourselves, my family, a couple of years ago now, and discovered all sorts of things about our family.
We did the same. My mom bought us all, the kits, and we all sent them out, and it was really interesting. So,
but that database, which again, you're searching anonymously until you get, some sort of hit. In other words, you're looking at 1 million plus people looking for the Huffmans or whatever your mom's maiden name was. In my case, it's McNeese on my mom's side, Thomas, obviously on my dad's side. We were searching for these family members. And so I've discovered cousins and other family members I never knew existed. And this has actually been very exciting and positive for my family and particularly for my brothers and me. And that's what the database was set up for. And that you're searching anonymously. And then if you discover that you are related to somebody, you have an opportunity to open up a dialogue, if you choose to, with people that are your potential relatives. And if you don't want to have that conversation, you don't have that conversation. And so you can, say nothing or block them or what have you. And sometimes people discover things about their families that they didn't necessarily know and might not want to know. But the point is that the database was put there as sort of a community good. And I think I can make a pretty convincing argument that for those of us that are trying to discover who killed or raped or assaulted our loved ones, I don't know that I could necessarily see that you finding out, that you have a long lost half sibling somewhere is a greater societal benefit than me, and with the help of law enforcement and a DNA lab, figuring out who killed my kid's sister. I don't think those, I'm sort of doing the weights and measures here, balancing gesture with my hands. I don't think that, as important as it is for people to find lost loved ones, is that any more important than the members of the Colonial Parkway Murders families figuring out who killed our loved ones? I think those pretty much balance out. So I think us using a database like GEDmatch is a completely valid use of a community good.
Now, if you could say anything to the people that are involved, I mean, you basically just said it, but if you could specifically state to them, what would you like them to get out of this conversation?
You mean after I get past the where do you get off?
Yeah.
Venting? Well, you sort of you get that out and you let it go. I think my last point about I think there are like a lot of things in life, there are balance. We all need to find balance. I think we can share these collective databases in a responsible way with law enforcement partners and certified DNA labs who are searching for answers in the same way that those of us that are searching for long lost loved ones can use those databases to make those connections. It's all of this is about connecting people. Now, unfortunately, a very, very small percentage of these people are wrongdoers and have participated in horrible crimes. And that hurts all of us as a community. And lots of people who follow the Colonial Parkway murders have said to me, they have no direct connection to this. They're not related by blood in the way that we are to the victims, but they see it as they see an unsolved murder or a series of unsolved murders. And in our case, you've got 8 young people in Virginia that are still unsolved and many other unsolved murders around the same time. Lots of folks have said to me, they see this as a loss for their community because they think it makes the members of that community feel less safe and that they particularly, and those of us that are parents, myself included, I remember my sister-in-law saying to me, once you've had a child, you're never free of worry, even as they get older. And as a matter of fact, I think my mom worried about us even more once we were, out and got our driver's licenses and started dating. And, she was always so fearful of things that might happen. And as it turns out, she was right in the case of my younger sister, Cathy. But I think there's a loss to the community that it can be rectified to some extent by the solution of unsolved murders and rapes, whether it's directly for the victims and their families. Keep in mind that my sister's no longer with us, but there are lots of victims of rape and sexual assault that are living with that every single day. And you notice I don't use the word closure, but because I'm not a big believer, but whatever small sliver of comfort or justice or a feeling of safety or, dare I say, closure that we can provide to individuals, whether they are survivors or victims, I think is very important.
Yeah, I think everything that you've just stated in this whole conversation is all stuff that the companies that do handle databases and do handle the public's DNA when they do sign up for these projects. It's important for them to listen to people like yourself because it really does show you what positive things can come out of it without it being, again, like you said, it's a very small percentage of people that have committed crimes that would even be affected by it. So like you were doing the weights and measures thing earlier, obviously the pros, in my opinion, outweigh the cons. And I do understand the questions of, I get it. I get the privacy concerns, but I also understand that at the end of the day, getting innocent people out of jail, solving cold cases like the Colonial Parkway murders, getting some sense of comfort knowing that that person has been at least identified in your sister's case. I think all of that stuff is vital and important, especially as we move forward in this new age of technology. And the fact that we have already sacrificed our privacy years ago with email addresses and whatnot. I just think that we need to accept the fact that these types of databases do exist and that they can provide very important and satisfying results to people that are searching for answers like yourself.
Right. And I agree completely. And I think much in the same way, a search for a lost family is a completely valid and often, positive and growing kind of experience for those of us that are interested in genealogy, which, my family has been. And by the way, we got involved in genealogy a couple of years ago because my older brother, Richard, his daughter, Anna, he and his wife, Ann, have an adopted daughter who's now 21 years old and graduated from college, but she's from China. And so part of this initial effort inside the Thomas family was to help Anna with her own search for herself. We're actually hopeful down the road that as more people in mainland China would participate in databases like this, Anna would like to find her birth parents someday. And, she loves her adopted parents and has been with them for 21 years, but we all need to search for self. And we actually got involved in the whole genealogical thing with the McNeese and Thomas families to just kind of show Anna where we were from, and that we're hoping that, we know where Anna is from in China originally, and that we're hoping that someday she'll be able to find her birth parents, and perhaps she has siblings and so on. The whole thing can be a fascinating process. I just can't see a reason why we're shutting out those of us that might be searching for a different answer. It's all about family. It's all about our search for ourselves and for answers. We just have a slightly different question.
Yeah, I think everything that you've stated is just spot on, and it's obviously you're passionate about it. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your thoughts on this subject matter, especially going forward. Like I said, we're in this. Like you had mentioned earlier in the conversation, there were cases like once a week, it seemed like, that were getting solved, and like the faucet has been turned off because of that. So
yeah.
I'm hoping.
Me too. And the cases we're seeing that are being solved, and it has slowed to a trickle, and that's directly as a result of Jed Match's decision. I think there are cases now in the pipeline via the family tree DNA system, and I think they will begin to pick up over time. But, that tap where we were doing just about one a week, that was so exciting. And it gave all of the families, mine included, and I'm in touch with the other 7 families in the Colonial Parkway Murders, it gave us such a sense of hope. And then to have those hopes dashed, it's been a blow. It really has, because this is one of the brightest spots we've had in cold case investigations in years. And, it's so exciting for us to meet family members from the Golden State Killer and other cases where they're after decades of waiting, they're finally seeing some forward movement. Potential perpetrators identified, cases going to trial. Many people have pled guilty to the charges against them because their lawyers have figured out, something, they've got you dead to rights here. You are guilty. You did do it. And now it's years later, in some cases decades later, but you've been identified, and there isn't really much way around this. Now, one case has already gone through trial and held up perfectly well. I think, as I said, this will be ultimately codified and approved by the courts, and it's already been through the full process of trial once. And then we've seen dozens and dozens of plea agreements in many of these other examples. This is a brave new world. I think we all just have to embrace it and not look backward, but look forward.
Very well said. And, thank you again for discussing this. It's a tough subject. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And we really appreciate everything you're doing, Bill.
No problem. This episode of the Colonial Parkway Murders, Part 3. If you have not subscribed yet to Who Killed Amy Mihaljevic, please do. And as a reminder, this is an independently produced podcast. So if you'd like to help keep the lights on and the recorders running, you can support the show by clicking the donate button on the right side of whokilledamymihaljevic.com or via the Venmo app with my username @BillHuffman3. Any amount is appreciated, as it does, as I mentioned before, keep the recorders running. If you want to stay up to date on the case, you can follow me on Twitter @BillHuffman3. So anyone with information can call their local FBI branch or email it to colonial_parkway_murders at ic.fbi.gov. I will put that on the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That will help support the show and help keep the causes that I do support in the spotlight. Anyone with information about Holly's murder is asked to email or call the Hampton County State Police Detective Unit at 413-505-5993. I will also provide the email in the show notes. People are also welcome to text any information to crimes, which is 274-637, with the subject line, Solve Holly Peranian. A $40,000 reward is being offered for information leading directly to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible. If you have any information regarding the case of 16-year-old Molly Ann Bish, you can call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Massachusetts State Police is also looking for information, and they can be reached at 1-800-808-9677. Don't forget, October 27th will mark 30 years Amy Mihaljevic's case has remained unsolved. So anybody with any information, please contact the Bay Village Police Department at 440-871-1234. The FBI is offering a reward up to $25,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the individuals responsible for the death of Amy Renee Mihaljevic. Stay tuned next week for Part 4 of the Colonial Parkway Murders with a special guest, Nick, from the True Crime Garage podcast, and Bill Thomas, where we discuss and take a deep dive into some of the suspects and some of the theories behind the case and where the case currently stands. So thank you again for listening, and everybody, please be safe.
Hi, I'm Matt Harris. Seton Tucker and I host the podcast Impact of Influence, which for 2 years covered in depth Alec Murdaugh, who was eventually convicted in 2023 of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul. That story continues to evolve, and we will cover that. Plus, we will tell you stories of other true crime events that have happened in the South. Please join us on Impact of Influence. And give us a follow on the Impact of Influence Facebook page.
Women's Running Stories, where we explore the intersection between running and life. Because every woman who is committed to a running journey has a story to tell, and this is where you'll find those stories. I am host and producer Cherie Louise Turner. I'm a 53-year-old runner, and together with original music by musician and runner Cormac O'Regan, we bring these inspirational stories to life. Please join us to fuel your adventures.